Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family,
regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Hey, good morning, Crosspoint. So very good to gather with you today. I want to take a few moments and I want to make sure that we're all aware of the important things happening in our Crosspoint community this Christmas season. Now, moving forward, whenever you have questions, the best place for you to go is going to be crosspoint.org/Christmas. You're going to find a calendar of everything going on there, as well as plenty of information and other links that you may need. But what I want to do today, though, is I want to highlight a few key things for you. And some of them are time sensitive in terms of steps that you're going to want to take. So I'm going to ask you that you'll lean in with me just for a few moments and as we tackle these. So one, we are partnering with the White Oak Foundation, which operates on the edge of Chatham County, about 8 to 10 minutes from Crosspoint's campus. And we are partnering with them to provide personalized Christmas gifts for 53 local families. Now, those 53 families include 225 individuals. There's kids of all ages, moms, dads, grandmas, grandpas, and we've been able to speak with them and try our best to get personalized requests for all of the gifts. One single mom of an 18-month-old gave us some ideas for her child this past week, and when we asked her, now what would you like? She said, well, I can't really remember the last time someone asked me that. And so friends, I just want to have us all be rest assured. This is an important thing that we're doing together to bring love and joy into our community this Christmas. I was a little nervous about how this might go this year because we don't have the huge trees with tags in the lobby that everyone has to pass by to grab your attention. But Crosspoint, you've shown up big time already. And seriously, done an amazing job. Over 400 gifts have been selected off the list in just under a week. And that's awesome. I'm so incredibly grateful. And the even better news is, if you haven't had a chance to participate yet in what we're doing together, we still have about 200 gifts left to be selected. So if you haven't done so yet, you can go to crosspoint.org/gift drive. You can find all the instructions on there. We have 3 times to drop off gifts on campus this week, starting this afternoon, or there's instructions on where to have them shipped if you prefer just to do all your shopping online. Our goal is to collect all the gifts by next Sunday so we can begin to organize them and put them together for these 53 families. Secondly, we're going to be having a Christmas drive-through event at Crosspoint's campus on December 19th and 20th this year. You can read more details about that online. And also, if you're a Kids Point family, the drive-through will serve as the first stop each of those evenings for our children's ministry event, Christmas Adventure. But one of the things that we're going to do there is we're going to pass out activity bags and glow sticks for kids to have during our online Christmas service, as well as a takeaway gift for each household that relates to the Christmas service that we'll experience together. So we want as many of you as possible to have those. Now, one of the beautiful things that's happened since the pandemic started is that our Crosspoint community has grown much more beyond just the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina. Just in the past few weeks, I've heard from groups of people in Australia, Bosnia, Scotland, Michigan, Montana, California, Tennessee, South Carolina, different cities across North Carolina that gather each week and journey now with the Crosspoint community online. So this isn't just a short-term thing for us. We're committed to making every effort to incorporate whoever wants to journey with Crosspoint from wherever you are in the world into the life of the Crosspoint community. So if you're not able to drive by campus and pick up your items for Christmas service, we would love to mail them to you. But if you want them mailed to you, tomorrow, Monday, December 7th, is the deadline to let us know. So again, just go to crosspoint.org/Christmas, click on the drive-through event link, and it will provide you a link there that you can fill out a form for us to mail you the gifts. So please take advantage of that if you're outside of the local area here, or if you have already left town before the drive-through event happens and you want us to send them to you, we will gladly do so. Now, a couple more quick items from the Christmas calendar just to highlight for you. If you're in middle school or high school, or you're the parent of one of those students, I want to make sure that you stay on the lookout for an email from your student's life group leader with a specific time and place for their Christmas events. And then also, as we do every year, we'll be having a Remember service on Wednesday evening, December 16th online. Now, around here, we have found that the Remember service becomes this really sacred space on all of our December calendars here at Crosspoint. We're in the midst of a lot of joy and celebration that typically comes with the Christmas season. We get to create space to acknowledge and grieve and mourn what we've lost and who we've lost and the pain and suffering of the past year. And I think more than ever, that space is really needed for all of us in 2020. So I hope that you'll join us for Remember this year. And then one last thing in regards to Christmas. One of the things that we traditionally do at Crosspoint every year to close out our Christmas service is we light candles and we sing Silent Night together. Now, even though our experience will be online this year, we want to hang on to that tradition as much as possible. But to do so, we need your help. This next week, an email is going to go out to everyone on our email list, which if you don't get our emails, as always, you can go to crosspoint.org/enews and you can sign up to get them. But we'll put it out on social media as well with instructions on how you can record a quick video on your phone of you and the rest of your household, whether humans or pets or stuffed animals, everybody's welcome, and how you can send that video into us so that we can have it on the screen during Silent Night on our Christmas services. Now, I don't want you to worry if you're not the singing type. I'm not either. But we're all going to be drowned out by those who are the singing types. But the main thing is we want to try to get as many of our faces on the screen as possible so we can enjoy that sense of being one big family together on Christmas. So look out for those instructions this week. And I'm going to ask that you just push through any hesitancies that you may have about recording yourself and just do it. Because I really think it's going to be a gift for all of us to see as many of our community as possible. And then lastly, as we do each week, if you want to partner together financially with Crosspoint to help fund all the good and beautiful things that we get to do together, you can go to crosspoint.org/contribute, where you can find all sorts of ways to contribute there via credit or debit card, snail mail, PayPal, stocks, all that. Or you can text the words CrosspointNC to the number 77977. And a secure link will be sent to your phone and you can contribute there. Again, Crosspoint, it's so good to be with you. And I look forward to sharing the rest of our experience with you today.
Walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall, but you have never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, for you have never failed me yet. Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands, this is my confidence, you've never failed me yet. I know the night won't last, your word will come to pass. My heart will sing your praise again. Jesus Jesus, you're still enough. Keep me within your love. My heart will sing your praise again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again. I'll see you do it again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever be. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Summer and winter, springtime and harvest, sun, moon, and stars in their courses above, joined with all nature in manifold witness to thy great faithfulness, mercy, and love. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. cheer and to guide. Strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
Once again, it's December. When most of us sort of naturally review all that has happened in the last months, all we did and all that wasn't quite gotten around to. Because in a way we're asking, was this a good year or a bad year? We consider all the ways the world wept and bled, all the frustrations and tragedies that landed on our world, on our own homes, trying not to forget as well all the mile markers and the laughter and the ways we grew, if even just a little. We've been here so many times. Enough times for many of us to stop wondering if questions about whether it was a good or bad year even matter. Round and round we've gone, round and round we go. But here's our chance to remember that in these final scenes of a year that has tested our ability to hope and challenged our capacity for unconditional love and joy, we once again celebrate Christmas. Despite its seeming to trick us with its annual familiarity, Christmas is at the same time an ancient fulfillment and entirely unforeseen newness, a mixed bag of nostalgia and a jarring novelty. The birth of the Christ is the death of our fear that hard chapters necessarily mean a bad story. Christmas, if we want, is a new morning as predictable as a clock, but offering renewal and goodness like we could have never anticipated. So, was this a good year or a bad year? Who can say? Whatever the verdict, love himself is born into it yet again, inviting us, yet again, to shed what needs to be shed, to learn what needs to be learned, to radiate hopeful kindness in a world starved of it, and to live more beautifully than ever before.
Good morning. We are in the second season, the second Sunday of Advent, and I want to talk about a story that is actually told after the birth narrative. You know, the one where Gabriel and the angels and the shepherds come. So in this story, Jesus had been born a few weeks earlier, a couple months actually, and Mary and Joseph were going to the temple to perform their Jewish religious duties. Now, according to religious tradition, if you were a woman and you gave birth, you were ceremonially unclean, and you couldn't enter the temple or touch holy objects for 7 days, and you had to undergo purification for 33 days if you had a male child. Now, that time limit was double if you gave birth to a female. But when that time of purification was up, the woman went to the temple and she offered the appropriate sacrifices to signify that she had completed her purification, and she gave thanks to God. Now, what you sacrificed at that time depended upon your wealth and your status. If you could afford a lamb, that was absolutely preferred. But if you couldn't afford a lamb, turtle doves or pigeons were considered acceptable. Now, the text here makes really clear what socioeconomic status Mary and Joseph fell in. Mary brought birds for her sacrifices. Now, often, at the same time that women and their husbands or the fathers went to the temple to offer sacrifices, it was typical for male children and fathers to go with them in order to receive a blessing for the child. And this blessing, along with circumcision and naming, was the symbolic act of accepting a child into the community. So Mary and Joseph were devout Jews, and this is one of the things that Mary and Joseph were at the temple to do that day, to get this blessing for baby Jesus. Anna, a prophet, she was at the temple that day too, like she usually was. In her pre-temple years, Anna had been married for 7 years, and then she was widowed. And we don't know what Anna's options were after the death of her husband. We don't know if she had children, or if she could have remarried, or if she could have returned to her family. But we do know that she chose, beginning somewhere probably in her 20s, to spend the rest of her life at the temple. And Luke tells us that she never left the temple grounds, that she prayed, that she fasted, that she worshiped every day. And if, depending on how you do the math, Anna was either 84 years old or she was 105 years old when she meets Mary and Joseph and Jesus at the temple. And regardless of her actual age, we know that she was a much older adult. She was a senior, but that she was really still healthy. She walked the temple grounds. She performed her temple tasks. She engaged in conversations with people. And Anna's title of prophet, it wasn't unusual. She was what we might refer to today as a religious professional. She spoke to people on behalf of God. She knew the scriptures. She knew her people's history. She knew the ancient prophecies. She was well known. She was respected among the temple. Now, Simeon, he was also drawn to the temple on this particular day. He too was a fellow AARP member. He was a senior citizen. We don't know much about him, including his exact age. And he's not called a prophet or a priest like Anna or Anna is. He's simply referred to as a devout man. But it is clear from the text that he was a regular at the temple. He was probably a leader there, and he was able to offer blessings. It's likely he was a rabbi or something similar. Simeon had a deep connection to God, and he believed that he had been told by God that he would see the Messiah, God's promised Savior of Israel, before he died. Simeon's name actually means God receiver. And that is what Simeon went to the temple that day to do, to receive God. He had been waiting for this his entire life. He'd been waiting for God to fulfill his promises for him of meeting Israel's rescuer. The mention of Anna and Simeon in this chapter is really brief. It's just a few verses, and the two of them aren't mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. The author must have thought that they were important, but we know so little about them. We do know, however, about the world that they were born into. They lived at the turn of the very first century CE or AD, before time was even marked in that way. Their lives straddled the marker of a past and a future. They were at the end of a generation that marked this huge change in the world. I think of it a little bit like some of our World War II veterans now. The world that they were born into was entirely different than the one that they would help usher in. Anna and Simeon's great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents had lived during the time of Jewish exile. A really horrible time when their people had been conquered, they'd been dispersed throughout Mesopotamia, and many of them had been forced into slavery. Anna and Simeon had been born into a world and to a culture that had been in constant upheaval for a really long time. There had been civil wars, there had been uprising within and without. And in the years before Jesus' birth, the Jewish people had actually migrated to Rome because of all the economic hardships and the threats of constant violence. They were a refugee people, and living in the Roman Empire provided at least some semblance of peace for them. There was at least protection from outside forces if they complied with Roman sociopolitical rules. If they did that, if they played nice, they were able to practice their religion in relative peace as long as it didn't upset the order of things. But it was a really uneasy peace. The Romans, as you probably know, were quick to retaliate if they got out of line. Rome had already at one point defiled the Jewish temple. They had already kicked all of the Jews out of Rome after one revolt. And they were absolutely not above crucifying Jewish people who stepped out of line, or any people for that matter. And there were plenty of bodies around that had been crucified to prove that they would do it again. And they did at one point. And it is really likely that Anna and Simeon had friends or family who had been killed throughout the history of these wars and uprisings. So, the text tells us that, like so many in their community, Anna and Simeon were both waiting for what they called, or what the text refers to as, this constellation or the restoration of Israel. And Luke 2 describes it this way. Now there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon, who was religious and righteous and devout. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel. And there was also a prophet, Anna. She gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were there, looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. Looking forward to the redemption of Israel, waiting for the consolation of Israel. These are really unusual terms for us. But what it meant was that Anna, and Simeon had been taught their whole lives that God was sending a certain type of someone to rescue their people. Someone to pull them back from their despair and put them back in their rightful place. Kind of like the underdog finally winning the big game. The secret weapon was coming and all would be set right. Their ancient prophecies spoke about this. Their parents and their grandparents had talked about it. Their rabbis talked about it. They talked about it over holiday meals. They clung to these prophecies that God would bring them a savior. And for generations, they had believed they were looking for a certain type of rescuer. Somebody to vanquish their foes, a king to come and restore them to their glory. This was their hope. And it wasn't a strange way for the Jewish people to think. It wasn't strange for them to think like this. They had always been really an underdog kind of culture, this countercultural movement. Their religion was established on the worship of one God, when all around them worshipped many gods. They chose to sacrifice only animals, when others around them sacrificed animals and sometimes humans. The Jewish people believed in circumcision, and they had a dress and a diet that raised more than a few eyebrows. They believed in a God who created them in God's image. They believed in being kind to the stranger and welcoming the refugees. They believed in relieving debt. They believed in a God that chose to dwell among them in their temple, and that simply required them to love and serve rather than to acquire and to perform in order to get love back. Their religion was already countercultural. Now they were just waiting for this Redeemer to come along and show everybody that they had been right all along. And something that day at the temple directed Anna and Simeon to the holy temple, to the holy family when they came in. Anna and Simeon had seen situations like this play out hundreds of times in their lifetimes. The purification rites, and then the parents coming with their children to be blessed. They had likely performed hundreds of blessings over crying babies and smelly bums and exhausted parents. But as soon as they saw Jesus, they knew something was different. This was not an ordinary baby blessing. Both Anna and Simeon thought they knew what Israel's hero would look like. They had imagined it for so long. They recognized who Jesus was when they first glanced at him. And when they saw him, they thought all of their hopes had come to fruition. Simeon, the God receiver, remember that's his name, he was so sure of what he was looking at when he saw baby Jesus that he quoted directly from the ancient prophet. And this is what the text in Luke says that he says. It says, Simeon took him, meaning Jesus, in his arms and praised God, saying, Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you may now dismiss your servant in peace. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for the revelation to the Gentiles and for the glory of your people Israel. Simeon believed God had fulfilled his promise to him. He could now retire in peace. And Simeon gives this initial blessing of goodness and light and hope for a nation. And Mary and Joseph, they marveled at what he said, and they were looking down at baby Jesus. The religious professionals had just confirmed what the angel had already told them, that this little bundle that they had was really something special. But then, suddenly, Simeon realized that this fulfilled promise that he had imagined, it was nothing like he'd expected. And I imagine that the light in Simeon's eyes changed as he suddenly became aware of the magnitude of the tiny little thing in his arms. It was as if he suddenly realized, yes, this was the gift that he'd been waiting for, but it was not at all what he expected. And so he speaks again to Mary. And this new thing that he says, it wasn't anything that any new mother would really want to hear. Simeon says in Luke 2:34 and 35, this child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel. And it will be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. And a sword will pierce your own soul too. Yikes. This baby was not the triumphal entry that Simeon had been planning to retire on his whole entire life. This baby was going to cause trouble. This baby meant change. This did not sound like the consolation that he had talked about from the old prophets. Following this baby sounded risky. Following this baby wasn't going to be passive. It was going to mean that you had to rethink everything. All of Simeon's expectations and dreams, all that he had been taught by his parents and by their parents, all the retirement plans that he had, all that he had ever imagined what being the God receiver would mean, he suddenly realized were not at all true. And we aren't sure what Simeon did after this revelation, but we do know that Anna stepped in at that moment and kind of rescued this awkward situation. And maybe Anna saw Simeon's eyes fill with panic or fear or maybe enlightenment. But after Simeon delivered his oracle to Mary, Anna steps in and she smooths things over a bit. And maybe because of Anna's widowhood, maybe because of her advanced years, she knew and understood a thing or two about unfulfilled expectations. Maybe she had seen enough to recognize that sometimes what we wait for and plan on isn't always what we get, isn't always what we need. Maybe she understood that part of being human is having expectations dashed and things turned on their heads. Do you know what the first thing is that Anna did when she stepped in? She gave thanks. And maybe this was part of her wisdom too. Even if this God baby was nothing like they had planned for or imagined, maybe she felt there was probably still something to be grateful for, because God hadn't abandoned them. God's strategy just looked a lot different than theirs did. I remember when my husband Brandon and I were brand new parents, and our first daughter was the easiest baby, but we actually didn't know that. We just thought we were really good parents. And after she learned to sleep through the night, she was angel baby. So much so that we were willing to fly to India with her when she was 15 months old. She sat in a plane seat for 9+ hours. She listened to her little music player. She played games. She napped. She hardly cried. It was perfection. And whoever had said parenting was hard didn't know what they were talking about, because we felt we should have started a parenting podcast because we were doing so well. Then we had our second daughter, who was also an incredible human. But as soon as she was born, we realized that maybe our first daughter's behavior hadn't been so much about our good parenting skills, but maybe more about her. Daughter number 2 did not have the same temperament, and we quickly realized that daughter number 2 would not have done nearly as well on a trip to India as daughter number 1 did. So we quickly nixed the parenting podcast advice idea, and we got some parenting books for ourselves instead. Then about 2 years later, we had our son. And by the third child, you think you got things down. We knew what to expect. We already had 2 wonderful but very different individuals we were learning to parent. We had this thing under control. Nothing could shock us. And boy, were we wrong. Baby boy quickly taught us that we had absolutely no idea what we were doing. Our other 2 parenting plans were absolutely useless. Baby boy is also an equally amazing human being, but it was like parenting somebody from a different planet. All of our prior knowledge, it was just basically useless. All of our expectations were out the window, and we had to start from scratch. And that's a silly example, but I think all of us get to points like this in our lives. What we thought we knew was not actually the way things were, or the way things are. Our expectations of a person, of ourselves, of a situation, they were not fulfilled in the way that we thought or we planned. And now we are left with our jaws hanging open, wondering what to do next. Or maybe it's a belief that we were given and we spent so much time fortifying and it no longer holds up anymore. That's when the panic and the fear sets in, and we're left with questions like, what now? Or more than that, what does that mean? What does it mean that everything I have based my foundation on has just washed away from under my feet? It's a little bit like a toddler who's learning to walk. You know, they sit there and they're holding on to maybe one parent's hand, and they've got to get to that other parent, but there's all that space in between. In between the goal line, they're teetering, and the distance seems incredibly far. They're not sure if they're going to fall, if they're going to land hard, if they're going to make it in one piece. That space in between those 2 points is where vulnerability sits. And it's also what makes us human. It's what leads us toward growth. That toddler, that baby is never going to learn to walk unless they enter that center space. You know what's interesting to me is that faith, religion, are really one of the only places that we're often encouraged not to grow. And that might sound funny, because you can go to the bookstore, you can go online and find so many things about Christian growth and prayer and faith building. But really, if you look deeper, most of them aren't about growing. They're about solidifying what we already believe, which of course has a purpose. That's encouraging foundation in our lives, but it's not really encouraging growth. If you think about it, our physical lives, we go to annual checkups, especially our children, just gone through 3 of them. They get a height check, a weight check, they get growth markers. And if something seems a little out of the norm, then it's looked into, it's checked on, it's aided if more growth is needed. In our mental lives, the same is expected of us. We're expected to know more in the 12th grade than we do in kindergarten. We're expected to know more as adults than we did as children. Our emotional lives are the same way. We're expected to act differently as adults as we did as children. It's not expected that we would go into our boss's office and throw a 2-year-old style temper tantrum when we don't get a promotion, although I know it does happen. It's unacceptable to hit somebody at the grocery store because they got the cantaloupe I was eyeing. But in the spiritual life that we live, in our spiritual realm, really in our faith lives, in our religious lives, most often we're kind of told or led to believe that we need to hold to the status quo. To question these long-held traditions, often paraded as truth, or to think outside the box is often discouraged. And in fact, it's often labeled heretical or unorthodox or unchristian. And we're led to believe that questions and doubt and conversation that lead to a deeper and broader understanding of God and faith and the world and community and how God works among all those things, that thinking about that somehow makes us people with less faith. That maybe we're letting God down, or we're letting our faith community or our heritage down. So we're taught to stuff all that doubt down, and what we're left with really is shallowness. What we're left with is what has always been. And what we're left with is being a people who remain stuck in a way of thinking that becomes harmful and stunted. And even as the rest of our lives, physical and mental and emotional, grow and change, the spiritual part of us doesn't grow. Part of being a spiritual person is leaning into that vulnerability. It means doubting and questioning. It means being willing to think about some things in new ways. Sometimes that means we get a belief that we've long held and we look at it and we say, yeah, this is really helpful and I find this valuable and I'm going to put this back in my belief bucket. But sometimes we see a belief, or we have an experience, or we have a relationship in life, and it makes us realize that we need to rethink something. Or maybe we need to just throw it out because it doesn't line up with the teachings of Christ in the way maybe that we were taught or in the way that we were led to believe. Or maybe we were wrong. And sometimes that's hard to admit. Sometimes it's hard to admit that our parents or our tradition was wrong. Because in doing that, we have to leave something behind. And often there's that gap in between what we leave behind and where we plant our feet next, just like that toddler. And this requires us to accept times of vulnerability. This means we have to be willing to say, I'm not sure where I'm going, but I do know what I need to leave behind. If any of you have ever been to the beach, and if you haven't, I suggest you go sometime. It's lovely, but wear a mask. You may have seen these really cute creatures in the tide pools, hermit crabs. And you actually don't actually have to be on the beach to see them because they're sold in every single store around the beach. My kids and I love to find them. We love to watch them. We love to pick them up and put them in our hand and just look at them. Hermit crabs begin their lives really, really small, and they climb into a shell that fits their bodies. But as they grow, hermit crabs outgrow this outer shell. They have to leave their shell and find a bigger one. I think it's like every 3 to 4 months that they have to do this. And when they leave their shell, they become incredibly vulnerable. There's nothing protecting them. They're vulnerable to attacks from predators, but they still make that journey from one shell to the next, because if they're going to grow, they have to do that. Now, how we do that in our own human spiritual lives is something that all of us as humans are working out. It's how me as a religious professional is still working out, but I can only give a couple of things that I think have worked for me as I've moved through this moving in this gap area between expectation and vulnerability and what's next. And I think the first thing that we have to do when we leave that safety space is to allow for grief. We have to grieve that what we expected to happen isn't happening. We are grieving the loss of safety and old beliefs. We're grieving what we're letting go. Second, I think we have to sit with our vulnerability. Sometimes it is okay to sit in that gap. It's okay to sit in the in-between, between the things that we recognize and the things that we don't. And it doesn't make us bad. and it doesn't make us weak. It is sometimes scary and hard, but sometimes it's exhilarating to recognize the freedom in letting go of some of those things. And while we're in that vulnerability, there's lots of things we can choose, but I think the most important thing to choose is wonder. Wonder that we still have the capacity to learn and to change and to grow and to feel. Then I think when we're ready, we can find community. Too often, when things don't turn out the way we thought or we hoped they would, we want to turn in and we want to hunker down. Maybe we're ashamed that we didn't know better. Maybe we thought we should handle things better. Maybe our heart has been broken by someone. Maybe we just aren't ready to accept a new reality. But regardless of whatever part of the journey we're on, we say this all the time, humans are not made to go it alone. We cannot pretend we are the only ones that have felt this way, because we never are. We are never the only ones. Maybe finding community means finding a counselor to talk through things. Maybe it's a friend that you can be honest with. Maybe it's a group of people. But our perspectives as humans, they rarely change, and we rarely grow when we try to do stuff alone. This time of year is all about expectation and anticipation, but it's never in the way we expect. This is why we come back to the birth story every year, over and over and over again. Anna the prophet realized that hope had arrived in the temple that day. It just was not packaged in the way they expected. And I think as Simeon, the God receiver, stood there in that temple in front of the Holy Family, realizing that all of his hope had really been misplaced, he also realized that the God he was receiving had arrived in the most vulnerable form. A human baby. Human babies are so vulnerable, and God chose to experience human vulnerability too. And things in our lives are going to be different sometimes, and they're going to be more difficult than we thought they were, and they're going to knock us off our feet. But we can remember that we are not alone in that. And that is a lot of what it means to be human. Lots of moments of vulnerability, lots of steps toward growth. Not just one birth, but hundreds of little births and deaths throughout our lifetime. This is the birth story. This is why we come back to it year after year, to remind us that sometimes things don't look the way they are, but we're back again to be reminded that we're not vulnerable alone, and things will keep going. As we go into this week, may we all go in hope and in peace. Amen.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.